Hello, and thank you for taking the time to watch my video today. We're going to be looking at the Sig Sauer Tango-MSR 1-6. This is not the BDC version of the scope that came out a couple of years ago. This is their newer fiber illuminated daylight bright scope. It has the FL6 Hellfire Reticle, is what they call it. I can tell you just from taking it out of the box and having a look at it that it is very bright, at least as bright as the Nova reticle that comes in the primary arms 1-6. We're going to go ahead and start from the rear of the scope here and take a look at our rear diopter. The movement is pretty smooth, though I can feel just a little bit of grit to it. That may work in over time. Get it all the way out there to the end. Come in about one turn. And we have, as near as makes no difference, absolutely no movement, which is good. We'll put that back in there where I need it for my eyesight and move forward here to our magnification ring. It's also well damped. It's stiff, but not too stiff. It does have just a little bit of resistance. I think maybe this part of the ring is rubbing against that part of the body. It doesn't really stop it from moving. There's no snags. It's consistent tension all the way around, but it does have just a little bit of noise that it makes. Our 1X is at the 9 o'clock position, and the 6X is over here at almost exactly the 3 o'clock position, so we're looking at 180 degrees of throw. And to help us with that, they give us this threaded stud. I like the knurling on it, but I'm not thrilled with the size of the threads themselves. I don't know that that would take much of a bump or a hit off of like a shooting table or barricade to break that off of there. I'm going to go ahead and leave it in there for now, but that would be something to consider, replacing that with maybe a more sturdy type throw lever, just because I don't have a lot of confidence that that would take much of a hit. Currently we have it sitting in this cheap eBay knockoff of a Geisley mount, so ignore that. It's just what I had handy for taking it to the range this weekend. It's a 30mm tube. And while we're looking at the tube, I'm going to bring this in here just as a comparison. This is a very matte finish. Like you can see there where it'll scuff a fingernail or whatever. I like the look of it. I like the texture of it, but that thing is going to get dirty. So if that's an issue for you, you'd like your guns to be kind of more glossy and clean, know that this finish is significantly less reflective, which is an interesting choice on their part. Just a little bit of difference, doesn't really affect anything, just it is what it is. So let's look here. We have our low profile turret caps. I like how low profile those are. I also like the knurling that they put on it. It's easy to get a good grip on those. Underneath them, we have some more of maybe an old school type turret. We're going to take a closer look at those when we do the turrets, but nobody's going to be impressed by those. Those are going to be some set it and forget it. We'll see how well they track when we get to the range. And I'll report back to you on that. I haven't had a chance to shoot this yet. I literally just got it a couple days ago. So we're just taking a first look here out of the box. On the other side, we have our illumination knob, which goes from 1 all the way around to 11, or you can go back the other way. It doesn't have a stop between the 0 and the 11. The individual detents where it locks in for each level of illumination is extremely positive. I like how tight this is, and I like how it just really snaps into that position. So you know exactly where you are. If you get it kind of here in the middle, it'll sit there, but then it's just a little bit more, and bang, it just clicks right into position. That's good. I like that a lot. And then here we have our cap, which they've made pretty streamlined, pretty snag-free. So when you're turning that dial, you're not really going to twist this loose by accident. Underneath it, we see our 6-finger cap with a little stud there that's going to put some pressure. It's got a nice washer, or excuse me, nice O-ring around the side. Could be a little bigger, but it should do the job. And we have our 3-dimple contact board in there. Pretty typical stuff, nothing revolutionary there, but it doesn't need to be because it works. And that's really all we need. I don't see there being any problem with that. You can get that on there good and tight. I don't think that's going to come loose. All right, so then at the front we have our 24mm front objective. It's set back in there a good distance, so you're going to have some protection if you should bump the front of that bezel on, you know, a barricade or a wall or drop it or anything like that. It's going to keep that lens from getting marred up. It does also come in the box with a set of flip open caps. One for the front, one for the rear. As far as factory caps, these ones are decent. They're like other Sig scopes I've seen where they flip open and they fold flat. Yeah. They have a nice positive click to close. The front being the same way. Flips open positively, doesn't get stuck halfway or anything like that. And it has a nice click when you close it. That's just going to be good for keeping dust off your lenses when you have it stored, or preventing other things in your rifle case or your rifle bag from getting in there and banging your lenses. I don't use them very often, except when I'm storing the gun. I usually take them off when I'm at the range just because I don't like the extra thickness that they add to your view when you're looking through the scope. I'm going to throw one screen up after this with the stats for the weights and the length and whatnot. But from here, we're going to go on to looking at the reticle. Here we are looking at the reticle in our Tango-MSR. Sig Sauer refers to this as the FL6 Hellfire reticle. It is a daylight bright fiber illuminated reticle with some BDC elements included. I'm going to quickly go through the illumination range, starting out at 0. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. The 11 setting being extremely bright. The camera doesn't quite do it justice with the bright backlighting, but it would be more than adequate even in direct sunlight on any weather conditions. And then back to 0. Now I'm going to dim this light a little bit and have a look at it. All right, once again. 1, 2, 3, 4. There at 4 we see it's starting to overshine the center. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One more. 11. Obviously far too bright for any low light condition. So what we see here is a pretty simple reticle with the BDC elements down there below the center. Those correspond to 3, 4, 5, and 600 yards with the 223 5.56 style rifle. I am not sure what the little triangles are on the horizontal stadia. I couldn't find any literature that explains what those are for. They could potentially be walking and running leads, similar to what you see in other reticles. But I don't quote me on that because I couldn't find anything that explained what those are. But as we see here, we just have a very simple, usable reticle. We have the heavy stadia lines coming in at 3, 6, and 9 o'clock to help draw your eye to the center. I had no issues using this at the range. It picks up very clearly, especially with the red illumination on. It's very fast at 1 power. I'm going to quickly go through the 1 to 6 zoom range, but we're not going to see any difference because this is in the second focal plane. The only thing we can take from that is that our exit pupil and our eye relief remain consistent, as we don't see any change in the focus on the reticle itself as we go through the magnification range. All right, I will set us up to look at these turrets. All right, here we are looking at the elevation turret, and the story of the day is going to be all mush all the time. I'm going to be quiet and let you listen to them and see their tracking. So there is nothing to get excited about with these turrets. I was able to get them zeroed without any real complication. I'm used to turrets like these and things like the Gen 3 and primary arm scopes and the first gen Strike Eagle scopes. They're pretty much the same. They are unusually tight. Actually take quite a bit of tension to make that adjustment, but then it doesn't, like whatever the last click you go to, it doesn't actually lock into that very well. And just a little bit of tension will actually throw it back to the previous one. But it does give you quarter MOA, excuse me, 1/2 MOA per click adjustments. It's good enough, but it's nothing to write home about. I'm not going to take any time to look at this windage turret because it's the exact same thing. There's just the same 1/2 MOA adjustments. The same mush and lack of positive detent. And they're just as tight as the elevation turret. Now that I've messed that all up, we'll see. I'll have to see next time I use this if it has retained 0 or how far it's moved. Those are definitely turrets that you will set and leave them alone until you need to re-zero, because there is no reason to take those caps off for any purposes of dialing in the field. All right, let's go see what this looks like looking through it outside. So we're set up a little bit differently today to look at our chart, but we are at 50 yards and we are currently sitting at 1 power. The wind might make me a little bit difficult to hear, but I will try to do my best to speak up. Now we've zoomed it into 6 power. We can see that we can make out quite a fair amount of detail on the lines of text, and our color representation on our color spectrum there, the red through purple, looks very good. We're getting a little bit of washout on the yellow bullseye because of the sun, but we still can make out the red bullseye, the blue ring, and the yellow outer circumference of the circle. With this lower magnification at 6 power, the individual playing cards are just going to be a little tougher to make out because we simply don't have the magnification to enlarge those enough to really see them. Overall, a good image. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time here looking at this, so I will go ahead and move us back to 100 yards and see what we can make out back there. We'd like to point out that the chromatic aberration on this image is pretty minimal, so that's good. We can see at 1 power how much of our car and how much of our target that reticle is going to take up. Still usable, but a little heavy. Go ahead and turn this illumination on. Right now, with a little bit overcast that we have blocking the sun, the 7 setting is going to be enough. Let's go ahead and zoom in. And when we get zoomed in here, we can tell that most of our letter chart is completely illegible. We still have decent color representation on our bullseye. The red center circle is tough to make out, but the blue and the yellow are still apparent. Our Roy G. Biv color spectrum there is well represented, but our tans and green and black over there on the right side are a little muted. Overall, the image is pretty good. We have very little chromatic aberration, though there might be more if the sun were shining on the car more directly and not coming through the clouds. Tweak the camera just a little bit to see if we can draw a little bit more color contrast out in those tactical colors and some more contrast on our letter chart, but I think this is as good an image as we're going to get at 100 yards. Of course, this scope is not intended for precision shooting by any stretch of the imagination, but it is nice to see how much detail we can pick out on the chart. From here, we will go look at some other buildings and signs at longer distances. We're going to take a look at our area rules and regulation signs, which are sitting at approximately 310 yards. Currently at 1 power. We'll go ahead and turn this illumination on so we can see how it looks compared to the direct light that we're getting from the setting sun this afternoon. Putting that in. Oop, nope, messed that up. There we go. I think that's about as good as I'm going to get that focus. So the words are not legible on there, but we can make out some of the individual sheets, particularly the yellow one, which is not as washed out as the white ones. But we can see the white pole sitting next to our stand, and the 2 brown legs of the stand holding those individual signs. The larger brown one sitting off there to the right, it's a little bit tougher to make out, but that's just because it sits right against a shadow behind it. Let's see if I can just make this a hair better. There we go. So all in all, we have a pretty nice image. The depth of field is acceptable. We don't see a tremendous amount of fisheye going across our image. I will say that the quality of this image that you're seeing right now is highly dependent upon you having your eye in exactly the right spot. The eye box on this scope at 6 power is not tremendously forgiving. I'm not going to try to show it to you right now because it's a challenge to get it back in position after I do. But I will try to give you a look at that eye box issue at the end of the video, just so you have some idea of what it's like. We'll go ahead and zoom us back out. And I will move us over to the 325 yard water pump. Would like to point out how much of the field of view the lateral stadia take up out there towards the edges on the left and right, and the 3 and 9 o'clock position. I find it distracting. Other people may not. I wish they were just a little bit thinner. But I'm going to go ahead and move us and get us looking at the next building. Okay, I have us reset over here looking at our 325 yard brick building and its accompanying power pole and transformers. In the foreground we can see the road and these sunflower stalks that head out there. That tuft of more tan grass is going to be at about 150 yards, and the power pole just to the right of our building is at about 200. Just to give you something to think about while we're zooming in. So that power pole just going towards the right edge of our field of view is at 200 yards. The grass, the tan grass, is at 150 yards. And our building is at 325. Again, I'll see if I can make it any better with the focus. I think it's probably as good as it's going to get. Maybe that's just a little bit better. But we get a nice view of our building with the shadows on it. We can still make out the brickwork, and we can see our power lines coming off of the building and going to the power pole where the transformers are. I'll go ahead and show you what this brightness looks like at 11 real quick against that more distant target. Still plenty bright. That's back down at 9. And we can make out some of the dents in our steel pipe coming off the back of the building and going to the ground. I would like to point out that there is minimal chromatic aberration even in that highly reflective pipe. So the scope is doing a pretty good job overall. You will notice up there towards the extreme top where that tree is, there's some of that fisheyeing, and that is as a result of the camera not being perfectly placed. And so depending on your shooting situation, you will see some of that bowing, that fisheyeing, if you don't have perfect head placement behind the scope as well, or if you're just too close or too far behind it. Okay, I have us set up and looking at the 550 yard building, which will probably be the last one that I show you out here in the field today, just because I feel like low power variable optics are sort of at a limitation when you try to get past maybe 500-600 yards. Okay, so let me see if this focus needs to be played with at all, or if we're pretty much good to go. Yeah, I don't know if that's any better or not. But we have the same nice image that we saw at 300 yards, and we still have that sort of slight fisheyeing out there towards the edges. But the brown power pole that is just to the left of center is at 330 yards, excuse me. I had to try to remember what it was. And our building in the center of the field of view is at 550. And we can make out quite a bit of the detail in the framework, as well as on the stairs, and the overall chromatic aberration is kept to a minimum. Now on our transformer out there just to the left of the building and partially obscured by our brown power pole, the fine details on those are starting to get pretty tough to make out, as is the brickwork on the building itself. But overall, if you weren't trying to take shots at very small targets, if you were doing, IPSC or C-zone type targets, you would have no issue at all taking those kind of shots at this distance. Small things like varmints and whatnot, that might start being pretty challenging. Also because you would be using perhaps about that third stadia line coming down from the center crosshair. And you can see how that cluster of lines and stuff is starting to obscure quite a bit of your image. But the tree line behind the building is also, easy to see the individual tree trunks right there on the edge of the tree line. Not too bad a performance out of a budget LPVO. Go ahead and pan us down a little bit. Take us back across where we started. Just let you see how this thing does. So you can watch as those things pan in and out of the field of view that it's not quite as flat an image as I've seen with other LPVOs. This power pole in particular. Some of that has to do with the camera settings, but there is a slight misstep as things enter and exit the field of view through the lens. I think we'll go ahead and get back to the bench and do the closing thoughts. Here we are back at the bench to give you my final thoughts and opinions on the Tango-MSR 1-6. Let me start off with the things that I like about this scope as I've had a chance to use it. The most obvious is the daylight bright illumination. I couldn't find any scenario, including in direct sunlight on a snowy day, where the illumination wasn't more than adequate, even for those extremely bright situations. So that's a definite plus for this scope. The next big one is the price. I was able to pick this scope up without a mount for $199 at Palmetto State Armory's website. Whether or not they will continue to have that price after, January, February timeframe of 2025, I don't know, but they're pretty good about having sales throughout the year, so that price may come around again. I think other places I've seen this have it closer to about $250 without the mount. One of the other things I like about it is the finish. It's a small detail, but I actually like this low reflective anodized finish that they've put on this. I'm not a huge fan of the more glossy finishes that you see on most scopes. I mean, those scopes are fine. They're not bad, but I would be happier if more scopes came with a finish that had this low reflectivity. But that's just my personal preference. One other detail that I didn't mention in the intro is this little line right here. You see it on this scope, and you'll see it on some of the other Sig scopes. And what it does is allow you to mount your scope level with your rifle without having to use other tools or just kind of do a guess and check sort of adjustment, which is pretty common. You just put this line at the midpoint of where your rings come together, and you're going to be extremely close to a true level scope. And that is very helpful, because I'm one of those people that will obsess over trying to get that last degree of alignment and drive myself crazy in the process. And this little line right here eliminates the need for that. So I like that. The other thing that I like about this scope is the 1x magnification. I find it to be very true. I like that it is consistent sharpness of the image all the way across the field of view. But it is very important that you get your rear lens adjusted properly for your eyesight. Because if you don't have it adjusted properly for your eyesight, that 1x image can be very fisheye. It can be very distorted. And the correct setting of this will eliminate most of that. At least for me, it did. So to move on to some of the things that I don't like about this scope, or that I think maybe make it not as good as some of the other scopes that you can get these days. The first being that the off-center clarity, and what I mean by off-center is when your eye isn't perfectly behind the rear of the scope, the clarity and the distortion of the image can be kind of annoying. And to the point, like when you're at 6 power at maximum, if you are even off to one side or the other by 1/8 of an inch, you're going to see some significant deterioration, and the image is going to get blurry. In high contrast areas where there's a lot of sunlight, there's going to be significant chromatic aberration in your image. And that's disappointing, because nobody likes a bad image. But I think that is a characteristic of this scope, because I believe that it is using optical elements, the lenses and coatings of scopes that were maybe a generation older. Think like the Gen 1 Strike Eagles, the Gen 3 SLX scopes from Primary Arms. I think this has optical elements in it akin to those scopes, as opposed to the better glass that you get in things like the Gen 4 SLX scopes or the Vortex Venom 1:6, which just have discernibly better glass. The other issue that I take with this scope, and it's just a personal gripe, are the turrets. I don't think I was very kind to them during my turret evaluation. They are mashed potatoes. They are just vague. It is a twist it, test it, and see where you're at, and then go back a little bit. And, you're going to fiddle with those a little bit until you get your 0. I was able to get a 0 on both a 22 caliber rifle and then on a 5.56 rifle. So it's not that you can't do it, but they're not giving you any useful information as you turn them. You're just gonna have to make adjustments, whether big or small, until you get it right, and then put that cap on there and leave it alone, because adjusting those turrets is not any fun. The other thing I have an issue with is with Sig Sauer, not so much because the scope has a problem, but the fact that Sig chose to sell this one without the mount. They sell their BDC version of this scope with a very good mount. It's actually one of my favorite mounts. They call it the Alpha-MSR Mount. It's a terrific mount. It holds zero really well. It's sturdy. It's simple. Why they chose not to include it with this scope is a question I don't have an answer for, but I wish they had. Even if they charged another $50 for it, which is the difference in price between this scope typically and the BDC version of it, is a $50 difference, but the BDC version comes with this Sig mount, and it is worth that $50. So then it comes down to, would I recommend this scope to someone? And the easy answer is yes. If you had a budget that was, hard under $300, with after you've purchased a mount, or, if you were just looking for the basic scope down around $200, and daylight brightness was something that was absolutely necessary, this scope, it does that. It does it really well. And you're getting a more than usable image, even at the 6 power, being conscious of the lack of image quality if you're not behind the scope properly. But I didn't really experience a bunch of trouble with that when I was using it on my rifle, but I could cause it if I tried to and just didn't have my head placement, where it needed to be. So, but that's just a training issue. The reticle in there is simple. It's not a bunch of extra information that might be of no use to someone. So it gives you a useful but simple reticle. I happen to think that it's a little bit heavy in its lines, but if you're going to be using it on paper targets and, larger targets from point blank to 100 yards, like most ranges are set up, it's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not going to give you a lot of assistance if you're out there at 300 to 500 yards, because then it becomes kind of heavy. It's going to start obscuring quite a bit of your target. But that's only an issue if you actually shoot at those distances. I happen to be able to do that. And so for me, I need a reticle that's still going to perform and do what I need to do at those extended distances. But that is just a simple use case situation where any scope could be good or bad for that purpose. And that's just a nitpick that I have against this scope, but it may be completely irrelevant to someone else who doesn't need to use it for that. So I think Sig has done a good job of putting together a scope that meets a pretty low price point, but gives you the essential features that you might want in a basic carbine type scope. I think you could also make a good use case for this on a lever action style hunting rifle. I think it'd be very good for that. There may be other use cases that I'm not thinking of at the moment, but your basic AR-15, carbine style rifle, this is going to do you just fine. So keep that in mind when you're looking at these. I am going to do a review of this scope, a comparison review of the SLX Nova and the Vortex Venom. That's going to be coming out sometime in the future. I don't know when yet, because I'm going to do individual reviews on them first, and I just haven't had the time. So it'll be sometime in the future. I don't exactly know when. But I would like to thank everybody who has stuck around this long and watched this video. Please hit that like button and leave me a comment down there in the comment section if you have any personal experience with this scope or the BDC version of it. And let me know what you think of the scope overall. I'd like to hear your comments. And with that, I will turn you guys loose and see you next time.